Grüß, willkommen in einem anderen Aufregungsvideo. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 40 of my figure gaming video series. This video provides some guidelines for new gamers who wish to enter the MICRO-ARMOUR figure gaming hobby and do not know where to start. It's assumed a new gamer will have decided on a nationality and period, but the rules and the figures which need to be purchased may not be so clear. Selecting the set of rules to play can be very simple or very complex. If you are going to play with an existing set of players, you simply ask them what rules they use and you have an answer to your question. If you're striking out afresh or want to try a different set of rules because you do not like the scale you are currently playing or other aspects of the rules that you're currently using, the question is very hard to answer. This is because you will change your mind a lot during this adventure or process. You may initially think this is not a really major issue, but as you need a force before you can test a set of rules, it actually is a bigger problem than initially thought. The answer is you need to build up a force mix which is as flexible as possible and which can be used with as many different sets of rules as possible to aid you in your search for the holy grail of rules. Once we've decided this, the first problem is that you need to determine how to base your figures. You could decide not to base them, but you will quickly find that infantry will represent the bulk of your forces, particularly in World War II. Thus, the basing question still remains, even if you decide not to base your vehicles. You need to base infantry, so you need to select a size, unless you're assembling a 15mm force. This video will assume you are using 6mm figures or even 3mm figures. If you live in an imperial measure country, most bases are 1 inch square, with depth increasing to accommodate the figure. If you live in a metric country, the size of 3 cm square is typically used. Some rules use variable base sizes, mixing 2 cm wide bases with 3 cm wide bases. Unless there is something very odd with the rules or special about the rules, you should just be able to standardize on the greatest width for simplicity, and that also allows you to swap figures quite easily. Most players will have an idea of the scale they wish to play: skirmish, squad, platoon, company or battalion per element. In some cases, players will change their mind, but the figures you purchase will depend on the scale you initially select. If you're playing a 1 element is a platoon scale set of rules, there are a lot of figure types you'll never use. For example, a single air defense gun, that is a real gun, will never be deployed in your force mix, and when you do deploy air defense guns, you'll probably need no more than 1 per your force mix. If you select 1 element as a squad scale set of rules, you have a very limited figure range, but the figures you deploy can be present in higher numbers, so your air defense gun does get deployed in this particular case. An infantry company tends to only consist of infantry, some motor transport, and an infantry portable weapons such as mortars. A tank company is even worse, often only consisting of 1 type of vehicle. Many rules at this scale use non-historical force mixes to give you a greater range of different weapons types, but these actually would be rare in real life. The next issue that you need to deal with is the number of figures. If you want a game to complete in a reasonable period of time, then the number of figures should average 50 per side over the entire length of the game. A good number to aim for is 100 figures, which allows you to field an attack force, defense force, and some supporting elements. This includes aircraft and artillery. It's possible to field as few as 50 figures, but then you have issues with flexibility and matching up with the scenarios. This applies to any scale. A quick note, for this scale I'm not including cars, trucks or APCs in my figures. There's no need to have infantry transport figures unless you really wish to, as infantry will rarely remain mounted in these types of vehicles. The exception is German APCs or all ICVs, as these vehicles will often fight. If you include cars, trucks and non-combat APCs, the number can rise to 150 figures or elements. At the end of this video, when I discuss battalion scale, I'll include trucks and APC, as at this scale it's better to depict these units as their transports rather than the infantry. At an element equals a company, the same can also apply. A quick note about my use of the word figures. I'm assuming this means element or base. An infantry element should consist of between 3 and 5 figures on a base. An artillery element consists of a gun and from 2 to 4 crew on a base. The same applies to any towed gun or mortar. If using a squad scale set of rules, you'll need to assemble an infantry and a tank company in the most part. The infantry could be mounted or would be mounted. You may also need a defensive infantry company as well. Meeting engagements between equal forces always end in a boring game. You need to have a more unbalanced game with reinforcements arriving at some point during the game. Fielding a specific defensive force of between 1 and 2 infantry companies, if modern, or 2 infantry companies, normally foot if World War II, is a good idea. You would also be wise to include any battalion level support formations and perhaps some regimental level support formations as well. The only other forces to consider would be divisional level artillery and aircraft support. Ignoring pre-planned fire, in the most case a battalion would need to share the divisional artillery assets with up to 9 other battalions. Medium artillery is normally employed conducting counter-battery or pre-planned fire, so your artillery pool consists of 3 battalions of light artillery, that is in terms of World War II nomenclature, or 18 guns in German or US structure in World War II. Between 4 and 8 guns is all you really need. As for aircraft, air-to-air combat is rare at this scale, so 4 aircraft is all you would typically require. If forming up a World War II force mix, you'll quickly notice that your force mix will mainly consist of infantry and their transports, if you're having the transports. A company will consist of 12 to 18 squad-sized elements, if not more. A tank company will consist of a similar number of tanks. If fielding a World War II force, you may end up with 3 infantry companies and 1 tank company. If fielding a Cold War force, you would have 1 mech infantry company using infantry combat vehicles and 1 or 2 other infantry companies and 1 tank company, in the most part. However, if you've decided to go down the World War II path, even in the Cold War path in some cases, most of your fingers will end up being infantry on foot. A typical attack force mix for World War II would be 20 tank elements and 20 infantry elements. If fielding transports, add 20 transport elements. Add 10 miscellaneous elements such as headquarters, close support vehicles, towed guns and other vehicles. Add 8 artillery guns and 4 aircraft and you have your force mix. A typical defensive force mix for World War II would be 40 infantry elements and any supporting weapons, which would normally be towed guns and mortars. A few extra figures and you arrive at around about 100 elements in total. This shows a possible German 1939 force mix. I was unable to place all the infantry on this slide, but there should be 8 more infantry and support trucks. This is an attack force and totals 51 elements, not including transports. The German tank companies consisted of a number of different tank types. In many cases, it would be rare to have more than 2 types of tanks in a company. One interesting point, something I discovered over a lot of playtesting, irrespective of the rules, you would typically have 3 to 4 headquarters. In this case, 1 battalion headquarters and 2 company headquarters, perhaps 3 at a stretch. As you go up the scale, you drop off the lower level of command and add the next higher level of command, or in simple terms, as a player you represent the highest level of command and have only 1 level of subordinate headquarters, 2 or 3. There are exceptions, but this rule seems to apply to most of the rules that I've used. Players should spend extra effort on their headquarters elements, as this is an area where you can add some real bling. If we move up to the platoon scale, a platoon scale player would field a regiment consisting of infantry battalion and a tank battalion for attacking purposes, and up to 2 infantry battalion for defensive scenarios or purposes. The figure mixes are similar to squad scale, except you'll field divisional level support elements. This scale gives you the widest range of figures, as your tank battalion could consist of different vehicle types. The number of artillery elements will drop, as each represents a battery of 4 to 6 guns. You'll probably end up with 3 to 4 artillery elements in total. In conclusion, it's reasonably easy to create a single force mix which can accommodate squad and platoon scale, that is, each element represents a squad or each element represents a platoon, rules, which may be why both scales are so popular. This shows a force mix from a platoon scale set of rules, that is, 1 element equals a platoon. Once again, a 1939 German Panzer Division. There are 2 infantry battalions, so double the infantry elements that are visible here. What we notice is there is more infantry. This force consists of 44 elements, ignoring transports, and 26 of those elements are infantry. The number represents the number of vehicles or multiples of 10 men. So, as this is taken from the set of rules which uses strength points, thus some minor adjustments may occur if playing, for example, Spearhead, which doesn't use strength points. Let's now move to company scale, that is, one element equals a company. A company scale, a player would be commanding a division consisting of 2 regiments, one of which would be a tank and the other infantry. For defence, they would be fielding 1 to 3 infantry regiments, depending on the nationality. At this scale, we'd be fielding all the equipment found in a division and including some corps or army support formations. On the other hand, a lot of equipment, only found in very small numbers, would not be fielded at all. The main difference is you would be fielding more different types of equipment but at lower quantities per piece of equipment. While it would be common to field 20 tanks of the same type in a squad scale set of rules, in a company scale set of rules, this would be very rare indeed. This shows a German 1939 Panzer Division force mix using a company scale set of rules. This also consists of 44 elements and has a higher proportion of armour, simply because an entire Panzer regiment has been used. Let's now move to a scale which was not included in my original video, but since I created this originally, it's become my main scale, that is battalion scale. Battalion scale moves us into a greater number of different elements, except of course for the infantry. At this scale, a player would be commanding a corps or about 2 divisions. All equipment up to a corps level would be deployed, and army level formations could be attached as well. I'll discuss this in more detail at the end of the video. This is one of the 2 divisions used in a battalion scale set of rules, thus you need to double it. We are using strength points for these rules, which may be unavoidable at this scale. However, the rules that I typically use do not use strength points, as I particularly dislike strength points, so it's possible to avoid it. Nonetheless, in this case, the number of elements are 56, which is a bit high because we're using strength points, which gives us a wider range of figures than you would if you didn't use strength points. In this case, we're only fielding 10 tank elements, but a wider range of other element types, such as armoured cars. So, in conclusion, pick a period, preferred rules scale, and build an army list based on those rules, which consist of up to a minimum of 50 elements. If you move to a new scale, then you may need to purchase some additional elements to fill any gaps because of the scale change, but it should not be a large number of figures. At 100 elements, the cost of a GHQ force is about $200, and if you select Heroic and Ross, significantly less. My advice is to start with the lowest cost figures, Heroic and Ross or similar. The reason is any initial force you paint and base will have problems. It takes experience to get the basing and painting correct, and it's better to experiment on low cost figures. Using Heroic and Ross, your 100 element force mix should cost well under $100, although once you include bases, paint and flock, the costs will move back up to the, or close to the $200 mark, or £100 if you come from the UK. When I initially created this video, I didn't include battalion scale set of rules, but since this is the second version, and in the gap, I've really gone down this path big time. This section deals with battalion scale rules specifically, which means each element represents a battalion. When I originally created this video, I never imagined it would be possible to game at this scale. But since I started using a figure game version of board game set of rules, the SPI Modern Battle Rules, it's my primary scale, and it actually works extremely well. But it takes a different mindset compared to a lot of MICRO-ARMOUR figure gamers who are more interested in squad scale. They're more interested in, line of sight and distances and moving individual tanks around. That's a very different type of gaming to this. This is more at a operational level where you're concerned about flanks and basically getting the right stuff in the right spot to achieve the correct objectives or military objectives. If you are going down this path, what type of force mix do you need to consider? We've already covered it briefly, but this shows a German infantry division where each counter represents a potential element. Now in this case I'm not using strength points. This is sort of averaged out basically across the division. So each element also represents the same kind of strength. In this case, if we ignore HQ support units, the German infantry division consists of 9 infantry elements, 4 artillery elements, and an anti-tank element, a wreck element, and an engineer element. This is a total of 16 elements. When you look at a wide range of different divisions at this scale, you discover that most divisions generally consist of 3 combat regiments, each of 3 battalions, an artillery regiment of 4 battalions, and 2 to 4 divisional support battalions. There are exceptions, of course, but as a general rule, most German and American divisions tend to fall into this category. A Panzer division would contain only 2 to 3 tank elements, which is a bit mind-blowing when you really come down to think of it. If you're going down this scale, be prepared to use a lot of trucks to represent motorized infantry, and artillery figures. A typical game of 48 to 72 elements would only use 6 to 12 tank elements and up to 6 self-propelled elements, with the bulk being trucks and infantry and a lot of artillery, perhaps 16 to 24 elements. Most gamers do not have this type of force mix, so if you're going to go down this path, be prepared to purchase additional figures. One scale that I've not covered in this video so far is regimental scale, where 1 element equals a regiment. Once again, I never imagined this was possible, but I'll have to admit I'm beginning an experimentation in this scale, and I think it is viable. In my case, I'll be using a figure game version of the s3e40 Panzerguderian board game, and I think it'll work, and the figure mix changes dramatically. But until I actually complete my experiment, because it could fail, I've done a lot of things that in the end I conclude make no sense. This could be one of them. I hope not, because I've purchased an awful lot of 10mm figures for it. Anyway, this concludes episode 40 of my figure gaming hobby series, in this case a video on how to get into the hobby of 6mm micro-armour gaming. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.